Good evening. The end of an era as Goodyear Tyres announces it's closing its Wolverhampton factory, costing hundreds of jobs. The company has been based in the city since 1927. It grew until the 1980s when it employed more than 6,000 people, but it's been in decline over the past 15 years, and the 330 employees who currently work there now face redundancy. Today, the local MPs called on the company to think again, and I'll be speaking to Emma Reynolds in just a few minutes. But first, here's our business correspondent, Peter Plisner.
Flying the flag outside the Goodyear factory today, but not for much longer, as yet another rationalisation plan shuts another Midlands factory. Here they mix the compounds that go into tyres. The factory also specialises in retreads, but Goodyear says it wants to move production abroad, closer to where new tyres are actually made.
Market demand is very tough out there, especially on the continent. We see ourselves, the industry, faced with a lot more Asian imports, and the strong pound doesn't really help it to be a viable economic solution.
Has to be noted that Goodyear have been running down this site for a while. Over here, a supermarket and a housing development. This all built on the site that used to be the factory, 88 acres in all. Now what remains is a much smaller factory on 18 acres of the site. Today's news has come as a bolt out of the blue for workers. Brendan O'Reilly has worked here for 42 years.
Well, it's devastating for the younger people with families and houses to keep up. And it was just, you could hear a pin drop when we were all told the news.
The announcement follows last year's controversial decision by the same company to shut its motorsport tyre factory in Birmingham. Unions have been highly critical of today's decision and have committed to fight the closure.
The first question, though, is what is under the skin of this decision? Is there any chance of turning that around? Because that's what we intend to do, or try to do. We're starting consultations in the near future, and obviously we will not leave this unchallenged.
Business leaders are also shocked at the closure, but say Wolverhampton will bounce back.
It's absolutely a blow, we can't detract from that, but I think in the overall scheme of things, I'm hoping in time it'll be seen as a blip.
Today sees the start of a 3-month consultation process, but unless Goodyear can be persuaded to change its mind, production will end here in January 2017. Peter Plisner, BBC Midlands Today in Wolverhampton.
And joining me now from outside the Goodyear factory is Emma Reynolds, the MP for Wolverhampton North East. Good evening to you. How much of a shock was this?
Good evening. It is a shock, and it's terrible news for the 330 people who work here and their families, but it's also a bitter blow to the local economy and frankly to Wolverhampton, because there have been thousands upon thousands of people who have been employed in this factory over the decades that it's been in Wolverhampton. And I have been urging the company today to think again and reconsider their proposal to close the plant.
But how can they? I mean, they're blaming falling sales, the strength of the pound. I mean, what can they do? What's the alternative?
Well, there may be some alternatives that they can look at, but if they do proceed with the closure, what I have said is that I will work in close partnership with the trade unions here, the workforce, the company, but also the City Council, the local enterprise partnership, other business organisations and major employers, to make sure that the people who do work here have a bright future ahead of them, and we are able to offer them the very best help and support so that if they need to move on, if the factory is closed, that they get that opportunity.
Because to be fair to the company, and they did invest £6 million in the factory as recently as 3 years ago, didn't they? So they must have been trying their hardest.
I think that's why it has come as a shock to myself and others in the city, because only 3 years ago I was here on a very happy day to launch that big investment here, and that was reassuring because we knew that over the years since the 80s there has been, a contraction in the workforce over the more recent few years, should I say. At one point in the 80s, at its peak, this factory employed thousands of people. Now it employs 330 people, so it has been shrinking in size, but it's still a very bitter blow that we might lose it altogether.
And have you spoken to any workers today? I mean, how are they feeling?
I've spoken to some of the trade union representatives. I've also had a meeting with the senior management of the company, and I've impressed upon them how bad this news is for Wolverhampton, and I've asked them to reconsider. But as I said, if they do go ahead with the closure, it's incumbent on them. They have a responsibility to the very, very loyal workforce that they've got here in Wolverhampton to make sure that they give them all the help and the support that they need.
Emma Reynolds, thank you. And you can find out more about the factory closure and the impact on Wolverhampton on our BBC Birmingham and Black Country website.